Good evening. Good evening again. As I don't need to say to all of us, this has been a moment that we knew would happen, and yet anticipating it doesn't make it easier. So here we are now, and hearing the choir sing Amen, peace, and ending with the choir Amen. I remember how many times, especially in these last years when Swami was not well and had a hard time getting up, he would always sing that song with the choir. And he'll always sing that song with the choir. So we have the great blessing of having two wonderful friends and Gurubhais with us from Assisi today, Anand and Kirtani Nayaswamis, who are the spiritual directors of our work in Assisi and have been there 25 years now. We were talking about that. So they were with Swamiji during that last week of his life and were with him during the last moments of his body drawing breath, and they're going to share a bit about what the experience was. So first we'll invite Nayaswami Anand to come up.
Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure. I think the hallmark of Swami's work is friendship. And we've seen in Assisi, we saw this Ananda family from India, and certainly a huge outpouring of love and support for Swami from Europe, and now seeing you all. Swami said to me once, there's more harmony at Ananda than I ever imagined. And Master said, in fact, these World Brotherhood colonies cannot happen without brotherhood. And Swami pulled it off, because we've seen so many communities that fail, and that's the reason why. It's infighting, it's pettiness, and Ananda's thriving because there really is this family of friends, of friendship. One time, many years ago, Swami met us, Kirtani and me, and he would be pleased that I got that right. He met us in Lugano, and he had been on a tour by himself in the fjords up in the north of Europe, and he was ill. He had had a hard trip. He enjoyed it, but at the same time, he'd had a serious difficulty with his health. And when he met us, he said, "I'm so glad to see friends." And it was only the two of us, but at the same time, that friendship never went beyond, or never went very personal. He always maintained a certain degree of impersonal friendship with everyone. And in fact, in January, we left Pune, and we went to greet him, or to say goodbye to him, and he struggled to get up, and I said, "No, Swami, please don't get up." And he got up out of his chair, and he hugged us both, something he's never done in his life. And it troubled me. I remember leaving thinking that was so out of the norm that I wondered if I would see him again. And I mentioned it actually to Narayani, and Narayani said, "Oh yeah, we'll see you in Assisi." And in fact, we did, but he did arrive, but this whole period in Assisi, he was very withdrawn. You all know that he wanted to begin, he was looking very much toward a life or a period of seclusion. And he really did want to go that direction. But so that period in Assisi was one where we didn't see him very much, and even there he had started to withdraw. And we went out to dinner a few times, but otherwise we didn't see him until the day before he left his body, and he had a little group of his close friends in for tea. And it wasn't very long, and there was nice chit-chat, and just a very nice time, but very short. And then he said, "I'm a little tired," and so we took our leave, but that also was significant. The next morning then, we were in sadhana, in meditation, and I heard this pounding steps coming down the sidewalk toward the temple, and Kirtani had already got up and started toward the door. It was Jaidara who had been preparing breakfast for Swami, and I turned around because of the noise, because you could hear those steps outside, and he motioned to me and rather loudly through the door said, "Something's wrong with Swami." So the whole temple basically came up out of their seats. And so we rushed to the house, and by that time they had Swami in bed. But what had happened was he was sitting at his breakfast table. He had checked his emails. He had sat at the table, and Jaidara said, "I'd like to fix you pancakes, Swami." And he motioned his head yes. Miriam said, "Swami, I'd like to just check your blood sugar." And you probably heard this, but his last words were anything. It's quite amazing, his last words, anything. So she checked his blood sugar, which was perfectly normal. In just a couple of minutes, Miriam had gone into the other room, but Narayani was still by his side, and he just raised his arm like this and started to put it down, and just this whole wave came right up through his body like that, and then he relaxed, but he wasn't breathing. And that obviously excited Narayani a little bit, and Miriam had tried to chant Om in his right ear, but she was crying, and so Sergio chanted Om, and he started to breathe again. So they just rolled the rugs away, pulled him right in his chair, right through the living room into his bedroom, and helped him into bed. And that's when we arrived. And I just knelt at the foot of his bed and grabbed his feet, and he was breathing, but with a long pause in between, and he just already didn't look like he was there. And another long pause, and then he stopped breathing, and Sergio chanted Om in his ear again. He breathed again a little bit. He stopped, and I said, "He's gone." And Narayani said, "He just can't be. It's just not. It's too soon." And she went to his ear and said, quite loudly, "Swami, breathe!" And he did. He went, and I had a hold of his feet so I could feel his whole body went, and that was just simply the last one. And he just never took another breath, and we rolled him on his side and tried just to see if there was any way to initiate another breath. And for a long time, Sergio chanted Om in his right ear, and when it was obvious that it was just a long time without another breath, we just said, well, maybe it'd be best to have a period of silence. And we just reminded ourselves that Master had said he would meet each one of us at that threshold. And so we just sat in silence and tried to feel Swami's passing and Swami's meeting with Master, and also Swami's freedom from that broken, troublesome body that he's endured so long. And so just one last thought I'd like to share with you, because it was an amazing week, and I hope that you all have also felt in this time since Swami's passing. But I remember that Master said that he watched Jnana Mata slip into the watchful state. And Master told Swami he would find God at the end of his life. And I just feel that this week and this time together that we're feeling that ever deepening merging of Swami into spirit, and it's just a real test in duality, because we miss a divine and dear friend, and on the other hand, we feel this incredible freedom that he is experiencing. And I just I hope we can enter into this period with Swami's homecoming, or his final resting place here, at least, that we can also just feel Swami's freedom, because it's just been a real tangible and amazing mix of emotions, but at the same time a real underlying bliss that really, that's what Swami loved the most, he wished the most, he prayed for the most, was to feel God's bliss, and I believe we can all tune into that. God bless you all, and thank you.
When we arrived at Swami's bedside, it was very clear that he was in his last moments of life in that body. And of course, as all of you have experienced, there were a lot of tears. And when he breathed his last breath, and we were all, after Shurjo stopped chanting Om, we began to chant Om together. And at the point where Anand suggested that we just pull back and sit in silence, for me, that was the real experience of what was happening with Swamiji at that time. Because if we're in our missing Swamiji and the emotion that we all feel at knowing that we're not going to see him in the body again, then the clarity of what is happening is lost. Whereas when we pull back, what I experienced was something that I've never experienced before. It was such a deep, profound peace. It must be something like Jesus was trying to describe when he talked about the peace that passeth all understanding, because it's difficult to describe, and maybe some of you have felt it and therefore will know. It felt as if, and this comes after trying to describe what it felt like, as if Swamiji was no longer in movement. His breath, his body was absolutely still. It wasn't breathing. There was no heartbeat. The stillness was so deep. Obviously the mental thoughts were no longer there. What it felt like was when Master said, I think it's in the essence of self-realization, where movement ceases, where motion ceases, God begins. And that's what it felt like. It was such a deep, unmoving stillness that it felt like in that moment Swamiji was really in God. And that feels like the reality of what was happening in that moment. Master said, at the end of your life you will find God. And in that moment we could feel, and in every moment, I know that for some of you it may be a disappointment not to be able to see Swami in the body, but my experience was that the times when I felt most deeply Swamiji's present consciousness and his presence with us very strongly were not in touching him in any physical way. It was in those moments where you, as you will be able to, you come to the place where he is resting, and you simply open and perhaps touch the spiritual eye to what is holding his body now, and you can feel that he is present with you. And this, I know that many of you have already experienced this in our community. Everything that followed, the bringing his body to the temple, having it there and doing our ceremony with him, and many of you, I think, followed that online. Everything felt like Swami was so much more with us. And I could really understand why he was wanting to be out of that limited body. Because when he was out of that limited body, there was so much power and so much love and that deep, deep stillness of oneness with God. And that's what we have all been trying to tune into, and I'm sure that you all have too. I wanted to share with you, we had such a wonderful presence of colony leaders and people from the various parts of Ananda throughout the world, and there was a lot of strength and giving in that for everyone who was present, who was there. And most everyone left on Sunday, and we knew that it could be difficult with Swami gone, and now all of these wonderful energies that had been with us helping to support were gone. And so we decided to have a gathering of the community before we took off to accompany Swamiji's body. And people shared some of the experiences that they had either seen or heard or experienced themselves. And I want to share just 3 of them. 2 of them have to do with children in the community. Gauri, whom many of you know, is the teacher of our youngest children. They're about 3 years old. She talked about how that morning when they came to school, they knew that Swamiji was no longer there in the body. And she was wanting to help them by having them send to Swamiji light. And she closed her eyes and said, this is a part of what they usually do. They pray for people. So she said, let's all close our eyes and send light to Swamiji. And she heard, and she opened her eyes and she couldn't tell who it was or what it meant. And so she continued the prayer and said, let's all focus and really feel that we are sending this divine light to Swamiji. And she again heard, and she looked, and it was one of the little girls who was doing this. And she said, what's happening? And the little girl said, Swamiji doesn't need us to send him light. Swamiji is God's light. And a little bit later, their next, what they wanted to do was to draw cards from a stack of cards that are divine qualities. And again, this is part of their normal day. And Gauri said that usually when each of them draws a card, which as they did that morning, there's a stack of cards and they'll really try to get to the one that they think is really meant for them for that day. So they all drew their card. And then again, one of the children said, well, Swamiji should have a card. Swamiji should draw a card. And Gauri thought, this will be interesting. And she just waited. And so then one of the children said, well, I'll draw the card for Swamiji. And she did not hesitate. She went directly to the cards that Gauri was holding out. She just pulled one out without any searching. And when she turned it over, it said freedom. And it feels like in so many ways, Swamiji is touching us through these experiences and stories that are happening. And one other that I want to share, which is interesting because it was told by a man who is not part of Ananda. He's a neighbor. He lives in the area. He's basically, I think, a farm worker. And someone was telling this story of how he was at the time when we were doing the memorial service for Swamiji. He was outside, and his land, he can see up on the hill, the temple of light. And so he just happened to look up, and there was this light. And I think he thought it was something like those those big searchlights when there's a fair going on or a big something. And he was looking and he thought, well, that's very strange. It's just this light. But then he went on with his work. And it might have been 40, 45 minutes later that he came to the point where he could look again. It was still there. And he decided to call a friend who was not at the ceremony because he needed to be working, someone who was connected, who is a part of Ananda. And he told him, what are you guys doing up there? There's this big light coming out of the temple. And our friend didn't tell him what was happening, but he realized that this, whatever it was being seen by somebody who was not at all influenced by Ananda, and that this light was just flowing up out of the temple. So just to share these things to help us realize how strongly present Swamiji is with us, because he's no longer limited by the body. He is really able to be much more with us than he was in the body. And I'm sure that's why he was anxious to get out of that limitation, and why I know we all, even in the sorrow of losing the presence of Swami as a friend with us in the body, we all feel the great joy of his freedom in God.
Ananda and Kirtani, that's so precious to share those not only final moments, but beyond the final moments. It has been a time, I'm sure, for all of us, of a great mixture of feelings and emotions and vibrations that we have been both receiving and processing. But I must say, honestly, for myself, I have not felt sadness. I've felt Swamiji in many, many ways more present and more with me as an individual than ever before. He's obviously prepared us well, not only with the years and years of teaching and the different ways that he's talked about spirituality and proper attitudes and so on, but all that is not what really touches the heart. People can talk, you can read good advice, you can receive, but that alone does not really change us. But somehow there is a magic and a potency to Swamiji's soul that goes far, far beyond any activity and any place that he has been in this life. And in a sense, and this is a little hard, a little subtle to describe, but him being in the body inhibited us from seeing his greatness and feeling his greatness, because we associated him with that physical body. He was never the physical body. He is not now the physical body, but it's easier to recognize that and realize that because his soul is no longer confined in the physical body. There are many, many stories of miracles and semi-miracles and odd, eerie occurrences and so on associated in the last weeks, but also in the whole of Swamiji's life. There are many, many stories that can't be explained logically. They can't be explained or recognized by what we think of as the normal parameters of reality. It just functions on another level. And Swamiji has been now released, in a sense, from the hypnotism that we all shared in. He shared not very much in it, but we kind of, in our ignorance, have confined him or thought of him as being in a body with a personality in a particular place. And now we're sad that he's not in that body with that personality in the place where we happen to be inhabiting. And it's all a kind of a miasma. And him being released from the body also helps to release us from that delusion. And the more we can tune in to his essence, because the body, the personality, was never his essence. His essence is light. Why send him light when he is light? Why send him our love when he's universal divine love? Well, there is a reason to send him light and love, but not for him, for ourselves. Because in sending that, we, as Master said, when we are the channel for some divine quality, that quality changes us. So yes, it's important to think of Swamiji and to send love and friendship and blessings and try to return, at least in part, what he has given us for all these many years. But I want to talk just briefly about the fact, because this is the first time that we've been together as a community, and well, we had the astral ascension ceremony, but that was, it was more turbulent. Nobody, including Davy and me, had had very much time to come to terms with what had happened. So now we're past that initial shock. But I want to talk a little bit about what the spiritual significance for all of us is of Swamiji's passing, because that's what we're going to deal with for the rest of our lives on earth, is what now? An event, a time of Swami's era, and this beautiful, beautiful expression and the creativity and dynamism and all of that, that chapter has now finished the last sentence and the last word and the last breath of the final sentence, and that chapter is closed. But that book has many, many more chapters in it. And in fact, there isn't just one book. There's a different book for each of us and for everyone in the world. So what of those chapters now? Now it's our time to not only take what Swami has given us, the teachings, the attitudes, the friendship, the beautiful, beautiful modeling of all of these qualities, not just talking about them, not just secondhand repeating of philosophy, but the living example of all of that. And we've all been touched by that. It's time to take those qualities which were never Swami's qualities. Those are God's qualities, and those are our qualities. Swami simply channeled them. He simply expressed them so that we could see more clearly who and what we are and who and what everyone else is. It's time now for us to more clearly and more dynamically take that high, high consciousness that Swami expressed and to feel it and to express it, each in our own particular way. We are each given a particular kind of mission, a particular kind of responsibility. And for many people, that responsibility is all self-enclosed. But for those of us who are on the spiritual path, and especially on the spiritual path that we have been given, we also have a responsibility to the world. Because Master incarnated not just as a beautiful soul, a beautiful teacher, a lovely example, but he incarnated with a divine mission, essentially to bring the consciousness of Dwapara Yuga into manifestation, the seeds of that into manifestation on this planet at this time. And he had an extraordinary life, but no matter how extraordinary and how powerful any individual is, no individual can do it all. And so Swamiji came along in part to complete Master's mission, but not, I shouldn't say to complete it, because it can't be completed, but to further it, to bring it more powerfully into manifestation. And Swamiji received great energy and great magnetism from Master. As Rajasi said, as Master told him, you have a great work to do. And as Rajasi said, and Master will give you the power to do it. Well, Swamiji's great work, in a sense, has finished, because the chapter of his presence on this earth has finished. But the influence of his life is only just beginning, really only just beginning. And it's up to us to help further that along. Now, we don't need to delude ourselves by thinking that if we don't do it, it won't happen. God doesn't need us to usher in Dwapara Yuga. He'll manage. But we need the blessings of being a channel for that. And so it's really for us that these great ones come. And that's absolutely true of Swamiji, that it is for us, not just us sitting in the room and us who knew him personally, but all the us of those who will receive that great blessing, that great grace that he was a channel for. And it is our responsibility, if we will take up the responsibility. If we don't want to, as I say, God has 5, 6, whatever it is, 8 billion people in the world. He'll find somebody that's willing to work through. But it's our blessing if we will now step forward and become more dynamically, more lovingly, more attuned as channels of this light. Especially now in the first weeks and months after the passing of Swamiji, it is a very special and very sacred time. This is a chance for each of us to be able to make deep changes, because there's a grace and a power that is present now. As Swamiji has told us many, many times, that when a great soul achieves enlightenment, his family members for 7 generations before and 7 generations after achieve a degree of enlightenment that they couldn't achieve on our own. And Swamiji asked Master, he said, well, what about the disciples of a great master? What about them? Don't they get something, essentially? And Master said, oh, they come first. Okay, so Swamiji has been released. He's now with God. He's now in that watchful state. And the blessings come on those of us who have been attuned. We are his spiritual children. And the spiritual children, especially if they are disciples, they come first. Well, this period in which we are coming first is a very special and very sacred period. And it's time to really work very diligently on cleansing the heart, on cleansing the mind, on cleansing the habitual patterns that we have that have grown dusty and deadened over a period of time. Interesting that it's spring and it's time to do spring cleaning for our consciousness. And there's a wind of grace now especially that will be with us in helping us do that. So we have a work to do, each of us individually, to take advantage of not just the life of this amazing, amazing soul, but also the passing of this amazing soul. And so we have a responsibility to cleanse ourselves, to become more powerful channels. And then we have also, if we will take it up, the responsibility to become essentially the third generation of God's channels to bring this great new consciousness into the world. Not only us, but certainly importantly us. We are those of us who have dedicated our lives to what Master and Swamiji brought. We are the pioneers modeling a new way of life. As Anand was quoting Swami saying, I never thought there could be such harmony. Ananda, if we can live the reality of the grace of Master and Swamiji, is an extraordinary place with an extraordinary potential to help the world. And we're blessed to be a part of that. But now is a time for each of us individually. It can't be done as a group, although it can be expressed as a group. But the real work is individual. It's time for each of us to go deep, deep within ourselves, attune more deeply and more completely, to throw out of our consciousness those things which we ourselves know retard us and limit us. There's a grace with us now to do that. And if we do, not only will Swamiji's extraordinary life have been a great gift to the world, but it will become enormously magnified by the thousands of hands and feet and intelligences that are dedicated to continuing to spread that consciousness. And we have, at this time, a great, great blessing. So let's not miss this moment. It would be nice to spend more time in meditation, even some more time in seclusion now. When Master passed, Swamiji went into seclusion for a couple of weeks. And at the end of that time, he felt not only the direction his life should take, but he felt the consciousness and the grace and the power to accomplish that. And then he came out and started what could be called his life's mission. And it's a very good model for us to spend more time in meditation, trying to feel beyond the surface level, beyond the physical plane, trying to feel the essence of who Swamiji was, the essence of who Master was, and the essence of who each and every one of us are, because we are all children of the divine. Swamiji is no longer limited to the body. Master is no longer limited to the body. And we are limited to the body only to the extent that we buy into the delusion that that's what we are. So let's try to throw off that delusion at this point. And if we do, we can become very blessed in this lifetime. And we can be of great benefit to the world.
I'll conclude with just a few words now. many of you have written us and expressing your love for Swamiji and the loss and so forth. And some of you have said this must be especially hard for you who are so close to Swamiji. And that's paradoxical. I believe in the autobiography, Master describes Ananda Ma, where she says the paradox of omnipresence, which is deeply personal, but at the same time absolutely impersonal. And it was the karma of some of us, Anand and Kirtani, Jyotishan, me, Durga and Vidura, and others, who got to spend more time with Swami in a social or working situation. But I was always very aware it wasn't personal at all. And I don't consider myself that I had any more special relationship than some of you who barely knew him at all. Because the friendship was not on a human level at all. And now that he's not in the body, I look back at the precious, precious moments that we shared with him in a small group, or that we all shared with him together at reading P.G. Woodhouse's stories, some of the great joys of our life. Singing, I remember during an early spiritual renewal week, in those days, Swami did it all. He did every morning class, every evening program all by himself, all the Kriyas, Sunday service. And it was the time for the concert. And we all went down. It was at the meditation retreat, and we went down to that lower meadow, and there was a campfire, and we sat around, and he was just singing songs on his guitar. And he sang, "Who is Sylvia?" And it was night, and the stars were out. And it was though, just as Kirtani was describing that shaft of light, it was though a shaft of light just came down and blessed all of us there. And the dignity, the regalness, the nobility, the poetry, he opened a window into a realm that our souls couldn't find on our own. But it wasn't personal. And in the early days of Ananda, he started a monastery which he called Friends of God. And looking back, and I'll probably spend the rest of my life looking forward, but also looking back, trying to understand the significance of experiences we had with him. I think we've shared this story not last summer, but the summer before. One day we were walking with Swamiji around the back garden. He would often, when he was here, invite us to come over for tea, and then we'd walk around the back garden, lower garden, and it became increasingly difficult for him even to make one circuit. But at one point he stopped, and we had just been quiet, and he said, "Oh, that's what that meant." And he said, "I remember a moment with Master when he said something to Jerry, one of the monks, but then he looked at me. And now I understand what that glance meant." So that was an event that happened, 60 years before. And yet that's where he was living. And for all of us, we can still draw. What did that lecture mean? What's the deeper meaning of that song? How can I go deeper in the techniques as he taught us? But as I look back now, I can see that the person that I thought was my friend wasn't really my friend. It was just God. God expressing friendship to whoever happened to be there, to each of you, to ones that haven't come yet, to the children that didn't really get to know him the way we did. And it was just him showing us how to be a friend with God in simplicity, in openness. sometimes when I look back on it, I'm amazed because we would tell him jokes to make him laugh. And sometimes they were so silly, and I can't believe that we did that. But he liked it. He would laugh and laugh. But it was like, again, showing us how to be friends with God. You know, if we put God on a big pedestal, oh, great Lord, and I'm not worthy, we distance ourselves. But he was showing us, I love you in your humanity because I see past the humanity. I see your divinity. And that's what it was about. It wasn't the humanity. He saw the divinity in each one of us. So for those of us who knew him, for those of us who didn't get a chance to know him outwardly, be a friend of God, because that's all Swami was ever trying to show us. That's who he was, and I didn't see it. I couldn't see it. He put a veil up, and reading P.G. Wodehouse stories and having barbecues. Many of us were present several years ago when he had every single one in the community come over on different evenings, and there'd be a barbecue, and he'd read a P.G. Wodehouse and answer questions. And I think he just wanted us to know that God is our friend, and he's real, and we can be real with him, and he doesn't judge us, and we can't fail him. He's just our friend. And so now the person that we thought of as Swami Kriyananda is with God. And he's saying, let's still be friends, but in a bigger way now, in a more joyful way, in a more freeing way. Let's be friends with God through Swami. Let's be friends with each other in God. And if we do, that power and grace that he only let us glimpse a little bit when he was in the body, it will be more and more revealed. And we can share it with everyone that we meet and change their lives too. So thank you for all that you've done to be a part of his life, be a part of his work. And now we want to show you a beautiful slideshow that Bhaktan put together in Assisi. We'll see it here on the screen. If you can't see it, you can rearrange yourself. And then after the slideshow, we want to invite you all to come up. We'll have some baskets of rose petals, and you can come up and offer them to Swami's picture, to his casket. And we'll also have a basket for you of a little gift for each of you from Swami. And we don't have a whole lot of them, so just one per family. And it's a picture of Swamiji that they gave out in Assisi, but also a little piece of cloth. When we were with Swami for the last time in Calcutta in February, he gave a satsang there, and this was his last visit to Calcutta, and they put a golden shawl around his neck. And then when we got back to his room, he kind of put it on the couch, and I said, could I have this? And he said, if you want it. And so I took it, and then the next day he was going to go to Master's home in Calcutta for Garpar Road, and he invited just a few people. He invited Jyotish and I to go along with him. And so I took that shawl and I brought it to Master's attic room with Swamiji, and I put it on the altar. So it's filled with Swami's blessings and Master's blessings. And there's a little piece of that cloth. So when you can each take one. So we'll start with the slideshow, and then when that's done, you'll be able to just share your blessings. And as you all know, Swami's casket will, after we're finished our program tonight, it'll be moved over to Crystal Hermitage, and we'll be able to keep it there for some time. And so we'll have our morning meditations there, and people can go during the day and meditate and feel his grace. So it's a time of great sacredness in our community now, as Jyotish was saying. Don't let your mind slip down into pettiness, because if collectively we can ride the grace that surrounds Swami now, it will be a great blessing for us and for the work of Ananda. And just as Kirtani was saying, the light coming out of the temple, the little shepherds in the field, they'll see it too.